of War and Politics =RK=. Part 5. In the vicinity of Objective Alpha. Geonosis. You got to love their support. It makes for a wide variety of sins. It had saved his skin more than once, while he was soldier for hire for various local governments. Unfortunately for the man known only as Forge, this time all the bombers and orbiting ships belonged to the enemy, and that indeed made up for a lot of miscalculations like infiltrating a heavy fortified area with just a handful of platoons, while whole divisions were busy expending themselves against the fixed defenses. The thing was, it criffing worked. Oh, Forge's current employer, who he had incidentally just carried into the small cave in which he was taking cover, had planned for such an eventuality. There were at least a couple of platoons securing each generator, with QRF stationed nearby. When the Republic attacked, Severance personally led a platoon of the locals to secure the closest objective. Initially the plan appeared to be working. They received reports that all enemy incursions were being engaged, half of them before reaching the generators. Then, to his utter lack of surprise, the plan fell apart, because the enemy did have a vote in the matter. After that, there was no more time for thinking things through. The Republic force was in sight and it was time to earn himself a bonus. That didn't go according to plan either. Forge managed to take out a few clones, which was surprisingly hard. The combination of their much better than expected training and new kit made them unpleasantly resilient targets. Instead of dying under his modified blasters, they tanked the shots long enough to seek cover and return fire. It was all right. A few custom grenades solved that problem nicely. One of the clones was immolated by an ice incendiary cocktail, another ended up as an ice-enclosed statue, and a third got his organ liquefied by a heavily modified sonic grenade. Forge was just starting to have some fun, when he saw his employer get into trouble. The Sith apprentice had been dominating the battle with her enemy counterpart up until that point. Then the other Sith, fallen Jedi or whatever the new Republic general was, got pissed off and started frying her with lightning shot from his hands. The Mandalorian thought the trick was neat and idly wondered if he could replicate it after a few days in the shop, while he sprinted towards the Force users. He unloaded half a dozen shots in the enemy's side, which only staggered him, though that at least made the man stop with the lightning show. It also allowed Forge to close in and unleash his flamethrower on the Republic officer. For a moment the Mandalorian thought that he got the bastard, though that notion was almost immediately dissuaded when a soot-streaked figure leapt out and back in a feat impossible to emulate without a jetpack or rocket boots. That's when the shield generator blew up, making Forge aware how screwed his side on Geonosis suddenly was. He glanced up, saw the deflector shimmering and moved like a man possessed. He grabbed Severance and sprinted back, looking for a nice secluded hole to hide. The shield above them dissolved, leaving the entrenched Sith forces to their fate. Forge could already hear the Banshee's song of diving bombers. The ground started shaking as the orbiting fleet jumped the gun. The Mandalorian saw the small entrance of a cave and dashed in before the world outside ended. What just a few minutes ago was a deadly series of interconnected trenches, bunkers and dug-in armor, all manned by tens of thousands of Sith troopers and droids, simply ceased to be under the relentless pounding of the Republic forces. A few minutes later, when the bombardment subdued, Severance was showing some signs of life after Forge hooked her up on as much stimulants as he dared. The woman groaned and her eyes fluttered open. What ran me over? That man who had been giving the Confederacy so much trouble lately. I was kicking his ass. Severance frowned in thought and pouted a moment later. From what I saw, you were. Until he got pissed off. Forge shrugged. We're in trouble. How bad? The shields are down. Enemy air power and orbital support are finishing gutting the army around us. That only leaves the factories themselves. Even with their own shield, they won't last long. Tan groaned. That leaves us in a bind. Forge nodded. Unless your friends dislodge the fleet in orbit in the next few hours, we're criffed. There won't be a counterattack here. Not anytime soon. Usually I would be all for running the blockade, but there's awful lot of metal in orbit. The Mandalorian mused. Getting captured isn't really an option. I'm not going for a last stand or something. I guess we could try slipping away and hiding in the desert until most of that fleet leaves. However, Forge shrugged. I know. With the Sith presence done for, the locals would want our heads after that mess with the Queen. I've got an idea. Forge muttered. I'm all ears. He told her. Are you insane? That's. Words fail me. Severance spluttered. It would make no difference in the end, though it might get us out of here. Besides, we did accomplish our mission. Griffith. Call the rest of the crew and set things up. I just hope that my master won't be too displeased. I don't look forward to explaining this to him. Don't look at me. I'm just a hired gun. The Chiss woman snorted. Hey equals. 4 hours later. Republic FOB. Former CIS staging area. Geonosis. The former SET command center was little more than a cave, which still bore the fresh scars of battle. The enemy equipment had been torn down and sent back for the intel corps to look over, and our engineers had rigged our toys in its place. We even got a few stools, courtesy of our CIS friends, something that my back was rather grateful for. General, we've pulled back our mauled units. 2 fresh divisions will be ready to move on Alpha within the hour. Colonel Pell reported. The man looked flustered and far from happy. One of the divisions, which led the assault, was a Pharmacy 1, thanks to the very nice tanks they were equipped with. They had suffered heavy casualties during the diversion, though an order of magnitude less than our own armored formation, that accompanied them. At least I had a proof that our allies' tanks were as good as suspected, and hoped that they would soon enter mass production to replace our walkers in the dedicated arm roll. Good. Send my compliments to the commander of 3rd Armored. His boys and girls did great. I will, General. Do we have word about the rest of the infiltration units? I turned to Shark T, who had arrived a couple of minutes ago. She looked a bit tired, though I could feel the satisfaction simply oozing from her. Kenobi, while battered, should be all right. Your apprentice is in one piece, as well as that crazy droid of yours. There's still fighting in Ahsoka's sector. No word on her or her men's status yet. All I can feel is that she's alive. Send additional units to that sector and keep a medevac ready. The assault on the transport hub? I turned my head towards Piet, who had been running various important errands lately. He did make a good aid. We've secured the upper levels, though so far no unit has reported a successful breach in the transport network below. Sir, we've been just contacted by a CIS officer, a Severance Tan. She wants to make a deal. That name does ring a bell. I muttered. The Chiss from whom my apprentice was cloned, and the woman who almost handed me my ass not too long ago. Patch her through, though bounce the connection. I don't want them pinpointing this location. RK equals. Part 6. Republic FOB. Former CIS staging area. Geonosis. I'll offer you a different deal. I spoke quietly. Shut down the shields. Deactivate as many droids in this hour as you can, and I'll allow you and your Mando buddy to leave Geonosis unmolested. 1 hour. If it's not done by then, we're taking down the factory complex the hard way, and we'll have a chat when we get you. I do have some questions for you. There was silence from the community. Consider it done. An unfamiliar male voice, one distorted by a helmet, spoke half a minute later. Then we have a deal. I don't need to explain to you what would happen if you're fucking with me, do I? I smiled and cut off the comm. Continue preparing for the final assault. Even if the shield goes down, proceed with extreme caution and look for any nasty surprises they might have left for us. Understood. Are you going to let them go, sir? Colonel Pell asked. Of course. Not doing so would simply ensure that any reasonable enemy commander in a similar position would fight to inflict us as many casualties as possible before going down. If it works, we'll neutralize the Criffing factories a bit cheaper than otherwise. At any rate, we won't be getting them intact. Make sure that the engineers go first if the whole complex isn't leveled when we reach it. I'll bet you whatever you want that the place will be rigged to blow. The main part of the campaign on Geonosis ended with a whimper instead of one last titanic clash. Tan held up to her word, and 40 minutes later the shield shut down along with a third of the droids protecting our objective. Orbital and airstrikes shattered the last enemy defensive lines, letting an armored thrust break through with no trouble to speak of. The locals on site offered fanatical, but futile resistance and were crushed by tanks supported by 2 infantry battalions kitted with our new equipment. The fact that Shark T, Arya and HK led the troopers sure helped mop them up faster. I was right about the charges too. The whole factory complex blew up before our leading elements could reach it. Well, that's done. Sit rep on our other offensive and what's happening with the transport hub? Sir, our forces are 10 kilometers from the industrial area and report heavy fighting. We have units 2 kilometers from the nearest shield generators, but they're bogged down. Start shifting our reserves to the active offensive. I interrupted Piet and addressed one of the comm officers in the CP. Wilco, sir. Continue. There's heavy fighting above the hub, though our forces continued to gradually push the enemy back. They've requested heavy infantry support. Shift General T and Commander Rastra's units to that operation. Anything else I need to know right now? Negative, sir. Good man. Carry 1. I need secure line to Coruscant, GAR HQ. Patch me to General Valentra. I ordered and relaxed in my chair. We criffing did it. With a bit of luck I was going to get out of this dust ball soon. There were only the small issues of compiling the never sufficiently criffed up Rs and dealing with the Skywalker fiasco. A few minutes later, the holo projector showing my forces' disposition in the AO shimmered and changed into 3 figures. Griff. One was Valentra, all right. He was looking unusually chipper in his Class 1 uniform. Next to him was Palpatine, who was grinning at me, damn him, and Yoda, who in turn appeared to be less than cheerful. Chancellor. General Valentra, Master Yoda. I greeted them in turn. General Vale, good to see you again. I understand that you have a report to make. Our primary objective on Geonosis has been completed. The experimental droid factories are gone. Our forces are within 10 kilometers of the primary industrial zone on the planet and pushing hard. We're also attacking various transport hubs to disrupt troop and material movements. This is a great news. I want to be the first to congratulate you and your soldiers for a job well done. Palpatine beamed at me. What the cruff got him so cheerful, damn it. Good job, Vale. It's good to see you still in one piece. Valentra smirked. Yoda stared at me for a long moment. Good news, this is. Disturbance in the Force we felt. Glad we are, that affect you it did not. I had to use all the tricks I knew not to smirk at the Jedi. Or burst into a fit of laughter. General Vale, achieving your primary objective on Geonosis at this time is a great news, especially in light of recent events. Palpatine spoke gravely. He was suddenly looking very concerned. I know that you could use a bit of rest, but the Republic has a need of you as well as General Kenobi. What's the issue? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. The Mandalorians, Valentra stated. They're about to receive a Separatists delegation. Well, isn't that interesting? I wondered what my Mandalorian friend has been up to while I was stuck on Geonosis. I was about to find out soon. You want me to negotiate their entrance in the war on our side? I asked. Neutral they must be. Or allies. Yoda muttered. What Master Yoda said. Valentra nodded. Your reputation would help with any negotiations and General Kenobi is friend of their current leader. Palpatine added. True enough. That would also keep me from kicking Separatists' assess on the battlefield for the duration, something that Sidious probably wanted. However, it wasn't like I could refuse. Besides, I planned to go to Mandalore sooner than later. After all, I wanted them on my side. Once we've wrapped up the situation groundside and Kenobi is cleared to travel, we'll be ready to leave. Is our arrival at Mandalore cleared up? We've negotiated to send a delegation. Palpatine nodded. Call us when you're ready to depart. What happened to General Kenobi? I could almost believe that his concern was genuine. He was wounded while leading a strike team to neutralize a shield generator. I shrugged. He's expect to recover within the week. Good, Yoda sighed. Lost too many Jedi we have. I have to give that to Sidious. He didn't show any reaction at the comment, though I knew that he had to be cackling inside at the thought. Speaking about Jedi, I sighed. Skywalker, I spat the name, displaying much more anger than I felt at the idiot. Valentra winced and Yoda's ears drooped. Even Palpatine placed a regretful expression on his face. That's one ugly situation. My fellow general muttered. He's going on trial for that. I couldn't agree more. I snarled. When is the investigation starting? I've dispatched a team and it should reach Geonosis in a couple of days. They will interview you, Kenobi and whoever you'll take with you to Mandalore first. Good. I hope that the Jedi Order has no objections. I stared at the Grand Master. I was surprised that Palpatine hadn't broken out his favorite alternative to popcorn and cola as he watched the show. A trial must be held. The regret in Yoda's voice was clear. I could feel it even across all the light years separating us. After the debacle with Windu, Skywalker's kerfuffle was going to shatter most of the credibility the Jedi had left. That wasn't something I couldn't have done better if I planned it. Even if it messed up some of my other plans. With Padme still out and with no indications if she would recover, that left me lacking in the department of close political allies outside the military, even if the Senate liked me for now. That only underlined how important it was going to be getting the Mandalorians on my side. One will be held. Valentra growled. The idiot destroyed a whole battle group worth of cruisers and got most of their crews killed. Peace, General. We've discussed the issue before. He will be tried. Palpatine played the peacekeeper. Once the situation has been properly investigated, of course. We can't afford a miscarriage of justice after all. Of course, Chancellor. Valentra nodded. I wondered what game Palpy was playing. If I was him, I would ensure that Skywalker gets broken by the trial, left without any support, before I swooped to the rescue. Not to mention, that it would be a great opportunity to practically destroy what reputation the Order had left. Apparently, Anakin was chosen to destroy the Jedi Order one way or another. Talk about misunderstood prophecies. Interlude, Palpatine. Chancellor's apartments. Location classified. Coruscant. Sheev Palpatine fell back into the reasonably comfortable couch in the living room of his temporary home and sighed. He was in quite the precarious situation and he wasn't entirely sure how he got there. The only thing he was sure about was that Vale had a lot to do with it. The Lord of the Sith had miscalculated. Misjudged that man, believing him to be a bold fool, claiming a title that he couldn't have possibly earned. Oh, the man was dark all right. He could sense it clearly. That didn't make him a Sith. Just a particularly resourceful dark Jedi at best. Or so Palpatine thought. There were small clues that he disregarded, that he refused to believe. Sidious sighed again. Sheer arrogance on his part, that was to blame. He could admit that much. After all, there simply couldn't be another Lord of the Sith. Not after he murdered Plagueis all those years ago. For 1,000 years there were only two Sith, a master and an apprentice. That was something he never thought to doubt. Oh, they had a few dark Jedi as minions. From time to time those servants were even allowed to think themselves Sith, when that was useful of course. It was a convenient delusion, keeping them motivated until the time to dispose of them came. The truth remained unchanged. Two Sith. After he went through the reports of the space battle above Geonosis, that wasn't something he would bet on. For someone with the intimate knowledge of the Force like Sidious, the reports were clear. Vale had used battle mediation on unprecedented scale, one only he might be able to match. Even if the man had been weakened in the aftermath, as one might expect, that spoke volumes about his raw power over the Force. That was a very far cry from the presence he had felt during their few meetings. The conclusion was simple, obvious. While Vale didn't cloak his presence in the Force as Sidious always did, the man suppressed his power, appearing significantly weaker than he really was. It was a good way to be considered a lesser threat. Then, there was the way he heralded himself as a Sith for all the Republic to hear. In hindsight, that was anything but the madness that it had appeared at first. Sidious had assumed, along with most Jedi, that Vale was simply grandstanding, lying to enhance his reputation. In this day and age a Sith simply wouldn't herald his allegiance. It simply wasn't done. It was a criffing madness. The sheer audacity almost made Sidious smile. It wasn't something that he had ever considered doing. Vale being actually a Sith, well, that at least explained the man's success. What he was doing was similar to what Sidious himself might have gone for if he was in similar situation. After all, what Sith wouldn't take advantage of a convenient galactic war? That didn't change the fact that Vale was a tiresome troublemaker, who was a big reason for Sidious' well-crafted plans burning around him. A deep frown marred Palpatine's face. Vale was dangerous, even if he could prove to be rather useful. Was he connected with the traitors within the Confederacy, who ensured that he was losing control of the war? Were those two problems unrelated? Dooku was investigating, though his agents were cut off on Geonosis with whatever evidence they managed to recover before Vale attacked the planet. That was less than ideal considering that uprooting the conspiracy was proving unusually hard. For a Sith like his current apprentice, that shouldn't have been the case. There was something deeper at work here. For a moment Siddi's eyes flashed yellow in fury. There were too many unknowns. Too many things outside of his control, and worst of all, his mask, Sheev Palpatine, was being kept under close guard after the attack on the Senate. Even in his persona as a chancellor he couldn't dispense with the protection the Gar gave him. Not after the attack on Coruscant was altered and used to shatter a copious amount of groundwork. A lot of generals and admirals who were his friends and protégés were dead. The same was true about most of his high-ranking agents in the intelligence services. Now people were investigating, searching for separatist moles. The Jedi too. Keeping his real identity a secret was proving hard. He no longer could afford to simply cloud the minds or remove memories from people who saw something they shouldn't. Not with the odd Jedi checking up his security on a daily basis, after Vale suggested it. To protect the Chancellor from Sith influence, the criffing bastard had said. The worst thing was that Sidious couldn't simply remove the latest thorn in his side. The remaining senators loved the self-styled Sith. He had saved them after all and was turning the war around. Or at least stalemating it now that the separatists were going outside the script and actually trying to win. The same was true for the public. For now at least. Palpatine was already working to subtly tarnish Vale's reputation. Once that was done, he would have more options in dealing with the man. Sidious smirked at his old idea to simply have Vale killed. Now that he knew him to be a Sith, that simply wasn't going to work. The smirk turned into a vicious smile. It was true that Sidious was bound by the trapping of the office he held as Palpatine. The same was true for Vale. The man was a general who had to follow any reasonable orders. He could be managed just like the Jedi. That's why Sidious maneuvered events to remove the man from the board for the time being by sending him to deal with the Mandalorians. It really didn't matter which side they joined. While Vale was busy dealing with them, Palpatine and Dooku would retake control over the Confederacy and start properly managing both sides of the war. After all, the ideal trap for Jedi worked as well for Sith. Usually keeping them busy away from the most important areas was enough. One question remained. Could Vale become a good apprentice, or was he simply a threat that must be removed when he was no longer particularly useful? At least recent events almost guaranteed that Anakin would fall under Sidious' influence sooner than planned. At any rate, Palpatine was going to have his hands full. It would be refreshing not to have Vale messing things up. Interlude, The Hound. Objective Alpha 3, Arklorgonia Cave Complex. 15 kilometers from Objective Alpha 1. Geonosis. Keep at it, men, we're almost there. The Jedi shouted. The tall man was in the lead, deflecting a hail of blaster bolts and sonic blasts, and generally keeping the enemy fire concentrated on himself. Behind the mobile shield wall that was Master Mundi, Hound and his platoon were dashing from cover to cover, slowing down only to send accurate bursts into the massive enemy trying to stop them short from the prize. Despite their fanatical resistance, the Confederate forces protecting the hub were slowly pushed back. Blasters, explosives and even flamethrowers were used to clear any strong point. The Jedi led the way, blunting the enemy fire and allowing the clones to uproot the enemy much faster and cheaper than it would have been possible otherwise. Now, Mundi shouted. A pair of clones carrying missile launchers sprinted behind him, aimed and let loose. 2 unguided rockets screamed down the tunnel and slammed into the bunker at its end. The first missed the firing port, gorging a deep crater in the durasteel. The second flew true and blew up inside, painting the walls of the bunker with its defenders. We're almost there. Press on. Mundi ordered as he charged. Grenades around the corner. Hound sprinted after his commander and threw a frag, followed by a concussion grenade. Mundi didn't even slow down and simply waded through the pieces of shattered stone and shrapnel that flew around the corner. The sergeant followed suit and almost froze in his tracks. They were almost atop of their objective. There was a short corridor, which widened into a vast chamber. In the far end he could see it lowering down in what appeared to be a huge tram station. There was a half-kilometer between the hub itself and the corridor. It was chock full with droids, locals, weapon emplacements and a platoon of criffing tanks. They were all aiming at the crazy Jedi, who was charging them with nothing more than his lightsaber. Fortunately, Hound's training kicked in, not letting him freeze in place and die without doing a thing. The sergeant dashed until he was outside the corridor and jumped, landing in a prone position. To his utter astonishment, the Confeds haven't yet opened fire. In fact, The droids had frozen where they stood. The locals on other hand were busy shooting for all they were worth, though it was too late. With a mighty leap, Mundi jumped over the first row of barricades and landed amid the enemy. Then the ceiling above the Confed position blew up, showering everyone with debris. Concussion grenades followed, and once they detonated, clones in medium and heavy armor started rappelling down. Hound grinned inside his helmet while he took backshots at the stunned locals. While the timing might have been a bit better, the two-pronged attack crushed the enemy resistance between his platoon and the soldiers striking from above. It appeared that Andy Mundi wasn't as crazy as he appeared. Further, the Jedi had done all he could to keep Hound and his men intact, including ordering a liberal use of flamethrowers to clean up tunnels and bunkers. Perhaps there were a few decent Jedi after all. Interlude, the Captain. 2nd Platoon. Delta Company. 91st Cavalry Battalion. 10 kilometers from Objective Beta. Geonosis. Even Veers had to admit that the Sarmasi heavy tanks were a joy to drive and command. The 70 tons of armor and guns that were wrapped around him were a far cry from the Republic light tanks he was experienced with. First, the LC-55 was a treaded machine, no repulsors. While that reduced its speed and maneuverability, it allowed the monsters to pass unimpeded through shields. What the machine lost in agility was more than made up by slabs of capital ship-grade armor and powerful deflector shield. Further, the tank had various active and passive defensive systems, both AM and anti-infantry, not to mention an AA turret and quad AA missiles mounted on top the cupola. Further, the Lancer, as it was known, handled almost as good as its lighter brethren. Its only problem was the hefty price tag. You could buy 3.5 of the walkers that were the GAR's mainstay armor/troop carrier hybrid for every single Lancer. On the other hand, a single LC-55 was a match for at least quartet of those machines. Maximilian smiled when his tank passed through the shield bubble, keeping the enemy safe. A combination of enhanced smoke and iron strikes had rendered the Seps nearly blind and allowed 2 tank regiments to close into effective range reasonably unscratched. The integrated sensor and command systems gave him a perfect view of the surrounding area. All detected threats were highlighted on the HUD display of his helmet, prioritizing enemy tanks and heavy weapon emplacements. Veer's company already had their standing orders, that left him with commanding his tank and keeping track of the overall situation. He had already designated priority targets and a destination for the gunner and driver to follow, and was looking over the overall situation. The latter was made particularly easy by the network integration and data sharing between the tanks within the AO, giving every tank commander an unprecedented situation awareness. That system by itself was priceless for all GAR armored units, and Veers would be doing his best to see it adopted by the army. He was sure that once the general had time to go over his reports he would agree. The tank shuddered lightly as its heavy cannon started speaking. Every 2 seconds a heavy particle bolt slammed into an enemy tank, eviscerating it, or blasted a HWP to scrap. 2 Confed tanks acquired them, making the threat warning system scream in distress. The driver slammed a foot on the brakes and sent the Lancer skidding over the rocky ground. 1 enemy shot missed and a second splashed over the shield. The turret turned to the right and the gunner put a shot through the closest enemy's sloped sides, killing it. Before the main gun could cycle, he sent one of the handful of AT missiles the Lancer carried into the side of the second enemy tank. The plasma warhead slagged half the machine and turned the surrounding sandy ground into molten glass. For a moment Veers wondered if he could get away from stealing this tank for his personal use, but then orders came from the battalion commander. The first enemy line of defense was breached and they were to strike the next. Maximilian's orders scowled down his HUD. Delta Company was to secure the flank until the next echelon arrived to relieve them and then rejoin the rest of the battalion. He sent the affirmative and started issuing orders. There was this nice ridge 2 kilometers to the east that would provide some cover from enemy artillery and give his tank nice firing lanes. Interlude, the Jeddah Master. Objective Alpha 3, Arklorgonia Cave Complex. 15 kilometers from Objective Alpha 1. Geonosis. Shark T surveyed her handiwork. The infusion of 2 battalions led by Force adepts had shattered the enemy resistance above the hub. Once the upper levels were reasonably secure, the combat engineers started drilling and blowing their way straight down, until they made a nice new assault path. Thanks to that, Shark T was able to drop on the unsuspecting enemy, who was distracted by the leading elements of the original assault force. After that it was all over but the screaming. The fact that a lot of the droids in the area simply shut down was a great boon too, but even if all of them were operational, the ultimate outcome would have been the same, simply more expensive in lives paid to secure the objective. Squads of clones were busy either trashing inactive droids, just in case, or rounding up the few locals who had the sense to surrender. Most had fought to the death in a fanatical attempt to prevent the capture of the hub. She understood their reasoning. With this transportation center captured, the locals would be doomed. They had to reinforce all places that could be reached through it and reroute any shipment that would have usually passed through this place. The conservative estimates were that the enemy logistics in this hemisphere of Geonosis were now crippled. The Togruta simply watched what was going on, deep in her own thoughts. Sometime during the final assault of the hub she had received new orders from the Council, which were transmitted to her once the place was more or less secure. She was to return to Camino and continue her old work of training the clones. There was no explanation. Nothing vague. She was to take the first available transport to Republic space and made her way to Camino ASAP. Shark T clutched her hands into fists. The Council knew that something had happened over here. The Jedi Master didn't believe that they suspected about her indiscretion with Del-Qatar, but she assumed that they didn't want to take any chances. If the orders were from someone else, she could have protested. T wasn't ready to go against Yoda, who apparently was backed by most of the Council bar those who were on Geonosis and few others currently out of contact. She served the Jedi and the Republic. That was her duty, so being sent back to continue her original mission should have been something ordinary. Instead the orders made her furious. Shark T needed to know where she and Vale stood. She needed his assistance to keep her head straight until she learned how to properly handle her emotions now that she no longer suppressed them. The Jedi Master simply wasn't ready to go back to business as usual. More importantly, she didn't want to. =RK=. Interlude, A Mandalorian and Her Demons. Brox's Bar. Mandalore. Bo-Katan was sitting within a secluded corner of one of the more respectable bars in the capital of her people. She was leaning over her helmet and nursing her second bottle of Corellian brandy. Huh? It might be the third? Nah. The first one was ale. She was pretty sure about that. It was quite good too. She was confused. Torn. She had reviewed all actions of the Death Watch she knew about. Some she found during her search for information too. There were a lot that didn't conform to her views of what a proud Mandalorian warrior should be doing. Petty crime, drug deals, extortion, casual piracy. It was supposed to be for the betterment of the Mandalorian people, right? Bo-Katan had trouble seeing how a lot of what her organization was doing would benefit the average Mandalorian. On the other hand, the members of the Death Watch were the biggest concentration of warriors that her people had left. Too many were chasing other, more peaceful professions. On the face of it, that wasn't a problem. If they kept up with their training, which was no longer the case for most Mandalorians. Her people were slowly becoming decadent. Weak. Only the Death Watch had the fire, the sheer determination and raw strength needed to effect a positive change. At least that was what she used to believe until her mission to Ryloth. There she met Vale, a man who proved to her that even if the Republic was a corrupt relic from a bygone age, it still had powerful people trying to change it. Even if in the irony of ironies, he was a Sith. That at least wasn't something she could doubt. Even if most of the galaxy had chosen to forget, the Mandalorians in general and the Death Watch in particular hadn't. They remembered. They taught their people about the past. About the Sith among others. Bo-Katan knew the real thing when he bested her in combat. That made her feel alive. He was a challenge to be conquered, something she was going to enjoy doing when they met again. Thinking about the Sith didn't help her with her issues. It merely made them worse. A Confederation delegation was to arrive tomorrow. Bo-Katan knew that her sister would never accept being on their side. Bo knew the girl well enough. She would continue to maintain the neutrality that had been a staple for their people in the last few decades. Bo-Katan could feel it. That wasn't going to be possible for much longer. The war was escalating, spreading. While the Confed atrocities did throw a lot of systems into the hands of the Republic, there were people who actually approved. Like the Hutt cartels. Like the Exchange and Black Sun. There were small empires on the fringes of known space who had reason to despise the Republic. various warlike species who saw the Confederacy stunts as show of strength to be admired. Then there was the Death Watch, who wanted to take a part in the war. They were dreaming for the good old days when they conquered the galaxy as allies of the Sith Empire. It had been a glorious age, until the Empire fell to inner fighting and the Republic started recovering her territories. At least that's what all the chronicles said. This time, there were Sith on both sides of the war, and the Republic was no longer losing the war. Bo-Katan had seen the reports. After the crushing victory in space above Geonosis, a victory that would be showering Vale with glory for a long time to come, the war was officially stalemated. That was the conclusion of all analysts both within the Death Watch and the Mandalorian government. Choosing a side was no longer simple as backing the clear winner. Bo-Katan drained her glass and poured another. Despite all the alcohol in her veins, her hands were still steady. Her mind wasn't totally clouded yet either. She slumped over her helmet. She wasn't drunk enough yet. Vale would be coming soon. Once he mopped up the enemy on Geonosis, he would come covered in glory, with the most dangerous weapon of them all, a crushing victory. That very thought both excited and scared her. Bo-Katan downed her glass and stared at the half-empty bottle. Her comrades were unlikely to back someone who worked with the Jedi. They remembered the Mandalorian Wars and everything that came after them. For the thousands of years the Jedi and the Republic were the enemy. Many would jump at the chance to fight the old adversaries once again. Others would be drawn to Vale. She didn't know what to do. She didn't know who she would back when the time finally ran out. The one thing Bo-Katan was sure about was that a storm was coming and it was going to tear Mandalore apart. She sighed and grabbed the bottle. Barring a miracle, another civil war was in the future of her people. Politics, Mando style. =RK=. Part 1. Republic Medical Station Sierra 51. Location classified. You want to talk here and now? Obi-Wan groaned. The Jedi shuddered in the cool air. The thin robe he wore after leaving the nearby fresh air apparently wasn't good enough for the cool atmosphere in the station. It's reasonably secure. I shrugged and waved at the rolls of Bacta tanks around us. Most of them were empty. This compartment was usually designated for high-ranking officers and was in the most secure part of the station. It's not like the patients here are particularly talkative, as you very well know. Kenobi gave me a flat look and continued toweling his hair and beard. What exactly happened before I awoke as canned food? The Jedi grumbled. You got shot. Or blown up. Perhaps both. I didn't pay much attention after the docs told me that you'll be up and running shortly. We've got another mission. What happened on Geonosis? We got the job done with acceptable casualties. Your apprentice is still recovering in a Bacta tank and has a trial waiting for him when he recovers. Oh, yeah. Once we talk with a bunch of spooks we're leaving for Mandalore. Start explaining. Obi-Wan sounded less than pleased. He was actually pretty grumpy, or so the Force told me. Anakin's stunts finally caught up to him and it's time to pay the price. While the military police investigates his latest stunt, he's grounded. I might be able to arrange a home arrest for him, somewhere with his wife if she recovers. Padme might be able to keep him out of any further trouble until the trial, and he isn't dodging the bullet this time. I pointed at a small cargo crate that was next to the Bacta tank Kenobi vacated a few minutes ago. Your lightsaber and spare robes are in there. Thanks. The Jedi muttered. How's Senator Amidala? Padme's still unconscious, though there's some progress in purging her system of the poison. Unless there are complications, she might awake sometime in the next couple of weeks. As for her mental condition, I trailed off. That was 50-50 at best. I see. I hope she recovers. What are we supposed to do on Mandalore? Kenobi asked. He let the damp towel fall to the deck, opened the cargo crate and started pulling the pieces of his robes. Convince the Mandalorians to side with us in the war. The Sith already sent a delegation there and they will arrive a couple of days ahead of us. There's no way the new Mandalorians would side with the Confederacy. Obi-Wan exclaimed. Your girlfriend might be against it, but she's not their absolute ruler. Kenobi spluttered a denial, however I ignored him and continued speaking. I've heard rumors that the Dead Watch will try seizing up power if the Mandalorian leadership decides to remain neutral or sides with us. Do I need to remind you that Kryze and her supporters don't have monopoly of military power on Mandalore? Unless you've been a busy boy and helped that delectable Duchess? I smirked. We're just friends. That's all. Kenobi groaned. With benefits? I smiled at the man. Jedi, they were so easy to rile up. Vale. Enough. How do you know about her anyway? I read all my intelligence briefings, then request more and expanded ones. Why wouldn't I be keeping an eye on the neutral policies which might join either side? How am I supposed to make realistic contingency plans otherwise? I asked in confusion. That should have been obvious. Obi-Wan gave me a long-suffered look and shook his head. What did you want to talk about anyway? Ahsoka, I said and pointed at one of the few occupied Bacta tanks in the room. Kenobi looked up and frowned. The little Togruta was floating in a Bacta tank. She was mostly hidden by multiple tubes which were feeding her oxygen, medicaments and food. What happened? She got unlucky. There were multiple tunnel exits near her target and Ashoka's unit ran into an enemy battalion that was redeploying. They managed to get the job done and seal the tunnels before being overran, however they suffered more than 90% casualties. The kid did good. Why is she here instead back on Coruscant on one of the bases closer to Geonosis? Kenobi frowned. My presence is clear, the powers that be want me on the negotiating party to Mandalore. Good question. What do you think would happen to her if your precious council gets their hands on her, Master Yoda has been cleaning up house and getting our affairs in order after the last fiasco. Obi-Wan didn't bite. Catch. I pulled out a data pad from my ropes and threw it at him. He caught it without looking. It was good to see that his wounds and a week-long dip in the Bacta hadn't dulled his reflexes. While Jedi read through the contents, a deep frown appeared on his face. I see. This is your fault. He grumbled and threw the pad back at me. That's not fair. I share the blame with Anakin. He's her master. Will was. I don't think that either the Jedi or the army would trust him with a goldfish, much less an apprentice. Probably. She deserves better. That still doesn't explain why she's here. What's a goldfish anyway? Kenobi muttered and started changing in his Jedi robes. Well, it's a fish with gold coloration. It was a popular pet back on my home world. I think. It's been very long time since I was there. I paused. Hell, I don't think I ever thought about Earth in months. I shook my head. It wasn't like I would be able to visit in a long time if ever. I pulled rank. As you say, the kid deserves better. When she awakes, I'll give Ahsoka a choice. She can go to the Agri Corps if she wants, or she can continue to be an officer. If the council has any problems with that, they can take it up with me. They won't like that. Corrupting the young now, aren't you? Obi-Wan joked. I'm an older Togrutas. I deadpanned. Don't let Master T hear you. Oh, she's very well aware of my preferences. I smirked. Something in my tone made Obi-Wan turn around and stare at me. No way. She's a respectable Jedi Master, and then there's you. He pointed at me. Even if you weren't a Sith, there's no way. I gave him a smug grin. Is there something that you aren't trying to corrupt? Only delectable women. Why the hell I would want to corrupt anyone else? I'm on painkillers or something, right? Where is Master T? I expected that your minder would be around. Me too. I have nothing against Shark T closely examining me. However, your fellow council members had the bright idea that I might be a bad influence and ordered her back to Kamino. I agree with them. Kenobi nodded sagely. We can't have you distracted, oh glorious leader. Sarcasm doesn't suit you. I have no idea what you're talking about. What's the plan anyway? When Palian and the spook they sent to brief us finish their Steam reunion, we're getting an intelligence briefing and leaving for Mandalore. I have to give it to the man, arranging his girlfriend to come brief us was a slick move. Jealous? My prospective girlfriend is traveling to Kamino as we speak. What do you think? I still don't believe it. Even if I had any evidence that I could produce, Shark T would new to me if I did so. True enough. She'll do it anyway. Tarnishing her reputation isn't the smartest thing you've done. You aren't protesting. No. I'm just leaving you to dig up your own grave. =RK equals. Part 2. Republic Medical Station Sierra 51. Location classified. Great. Finally we're all here. I beamed at the other people, who were stuck in a small conference room with me. Commodore Palian, his girlfriend Helena, the reagent we were here to meet among other things, Kenobi and myself. Thanks to some kind of meddling in the Senate, neither Organa or Iblis were going to head the diplomatic party to Mandalore. Thanks to my good friend, the Chancellor, I had the distinct honor of doing so myself, instead of another senator. So whatever criffing disaster was cooking on Mandalore would be my fault, I had no doubt about that. Joy. We were stuck in a bland small room, which had a round table in the middle. There were 12 chairs set up around it, a built-in holo projector, and that was it. At least the place was nicely lit up. If you two are done for the moment, I raised an eyebrow at Palion, who for once was looking rather disheveled. Agent Davis could start briefing us. You're about to get criffed in a way you won't enjoy. Helena deadpanned. Yes, apparently that's the plan. The lack of any diplomatic personnel arriving with you and the missive I got from the Chancellor's office just before we docked were enough of a clue. You didn't mention any of that. Obi-Wan shot me an accusing look. I'm mentioning it now. I shrugged. I'll be the Republic negotiator for our visit with you, acting as my aide. No senators or diplomatic staff besides whoever will be able to poach from the embassy. At least the ambassador might be of some help. No diplomatic staff. We're being set up to fail. Kenobi looked less than pleased as he stated the obvious. Well, there are some senators who actually studied history. Devers rolled her eyes. They apparently aren't too thrilled with getting the Mandalorians rearmed or on our side. They fear a betrayal. After all, historically they have been enemies of the Republic. They were my people, allies too. That's another point against them. The intelligence agent glared at me. I wasn't sure if it was because I was a Sith or because I cut her reunion with Palion short. Probably a bit of both. It's also something I might be able to work with. I smiled. The idea's for the Mandalorians to make an alliance with the Republic, not with you. Obi-Wan added in a dry voice. Why not both? I grinned. What did you do? The Jedi Master narrowed his eyes at me. Nothing. Yet. I spoke with as much innocence as I could. No one was buying it. This is going to be a disaster. Obi-Wan groaned. That remains to be seen. You have a briefing for us, Agent Davis. Let's get it done so you two lovebirds could return to cuddling or whatever adult things you were doing. Just don't speak about it in front of the Jedi or you'll shock the poor sod. I'm not a virgin, you know. Kenobi deadpanned. That's a shocking discovery. Do the rest of the Jedi know, or did you just handle me a lot of blackmail material? You're supposed to be a general. Act like it. Obi-Wan groaned. Sure enough. Start briefing us. I waved at the woman. Helena sighed, gave a sharp nod and put her professional face on. The tensions between the new Mandalorians, who are currently ruling on Mandalore, and their main opposition, the Death Watch, are about to explode. Even without the CIS delegation arriving and pressuring the legitimate government, Mandalore is on the brink of a civil war. Unless the situation is handled very carefully, we might be the spark that's needed for the sector to go up in flames. That's not necessarily a bad thing. The only thing that really matters is that the Mandalorians remain neutral, join us, or are crippled to the point that they are no longer a threat. 3 pairs of eyes stared at me. 2 of them then nodded, while Obi-Wan glared daggers at me. Those are the acceptable outcomes of our visit, yes. Helena nodded and earned herself a dirty look from Kenobi. What do we know about the CIS delegation, their agents in place and game plan? Palion asked. Admiral Duaninga will be negotiating for the Separatists. Well, he's one of the few who might pull it off. I must allowed. The bastard came close to making it a Pyrrhic victory above Geonosis. The Mandalorian clan leaders are likely to respect him. That's our reading as well. Besides the above-board negotiation, we know that the CIS has been heavily investing in the Death Watch. That's the main reason we believe that a favorable outcome is unlikely. They aren't particularly big fans of the Republic. Helena added. I have a contact who might be useful. That's good. We lost contact with our last agent in the Death Watch a week ago. They're the greatest threat for our interests on Mandalore. Duchess Kryze is a friend of the Republic, however the new Mandalorian movement she's a part of doesn't have the political clout to forge an alliance with us without support from the opposition. Not to mention that she's against any Mandalorian military adventures. I added. That was a public knowledge and the main reason her sister was royally pissed off at her. Let's be frank, no matter the public face the new Mandalorians have been putting ever since their raise to power, the Mandalorians remain a warrior cultures. The Duchess policies haven't exactly won the hearts of the majority of the population, merely of the largest cohesive bloc, and the Death Watch are close second. You're certainly well informed. Helena nodded. That's essentially correct. I shrugged. I did my homework. After all, Mandalore had been on my to-do list for months. What do you plan? Obi-Wan asked. Forge an alliance with your girlfriend or play kingmaker. I shrugged. I've changed a government or two back in the good old days. It was time to see which way Bo-Katan was going to jump.